Welcome, everyone. We're so glad it's another Friday, and that means it's Friday Forum. And I'm Cyndy McDonald. I'm your hostess, and I'm so pleased today to have with me one of my good friends and somebody I've known for many years. And he is definitely a subject matter expert, Peter VanBuskirk. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Cyndy. Good to see
So
you.
good to see you too. So Peter is an author. He is a nationally known speaker. He speaks all over the country and all over the world, I imagine, right? He is founder and CEO of Best College Fit and works as a consultant. He's probably been in many of your communities or cities um, working with everyone. So we're glad to have you here. Now, let me make sure. Okay. So you know where we're at. I'm calling from California. Peter, where are you located?
I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
So everybody, let us know where you're from. Put in the chat. We've started this a couple of weeks ago. Make sure your chat is on all panelists and attendees. Don't send us messages just to the panelists. I want everybody to see because I'll respond to them as we go, but you can, hopefully, Peter, you're seeing where everybody is coming from. We've got Boulder, Vancouver, Long Island, oh my goodness,
Going
Texas.
pretty fast. No, that's right.
You guys are just so great, and I'm just so glad. One person had said instead of spending Tuesdays with Mari, she spends Fridays with Cyndy. So we're glad to have you here. So today we're going to talk about just what's been going on. Our whole purpose of these Friday forums is to look at the news and create sanity and calmness and just give us a point of reference. So that's why, Peter, I wanted to have you come because I know you are just the person to do that.
Well, thank you. You're very kind to say so. And I think that just looking at some of the names as they flash on the participant list, I recognize some folks, many probably know of me, but may not know about me. So I would just offer an extended introduction briefly to kind of get me on the map. I spent the better part of 25 years working in college admission. Most of that, almost all of that, was at Franklin and Marshall College, where I was able to go up through the ranks and become the dean of admission, where during that time I was responsible for the financial aid and scholarship budgets as well and programs. Interestingly, for a year and a half while I was the dean of admission, they asked me to be the athletic director too. So I had a rather interesting experience trying to manage two shops. And I finished my experience at the college working in the provost office. I was not the provost, but I was the executive officer to the office of the provost, which gave me a rather unique portal into how the institution manages itself as a business entity, but how the academic side also relied upon the enrollment side for its treasury, if you will. So at any rate, my experience in higher education over that period of time gave me a holistic perspective on college admission. So I've seen how this works, this whole recruitment and selection process through the eyes of the people who will recruit, the eyes of the people who will look at applications and make decisions, through the eyes of the people who make those decisions about who gets how much financial aid and why, and also from the perspective of those who teach. So I give you that. I would also say with great satisfaction now that my three kids have gone to college, despite me. And I
In spite of you, huh?
Well, truth be told, I'm a bit of a helicopter dad. And you can imagine being my child in this process. Oh, man's the dean of admission and he's a helicopter dad. He won't let us alone. So, I'd have a lot of ideas about how this could work for them. And every time I think about something, they'd have other things to do. So that's why I say I'm very happy that they've made their way through higher education and on to bigger and better things in life. But I think finally, I'm a student-centered guy. And this is perhaps at the core of why I moved out of higher education into working with Best College Fit. I believe that it's really important for students of any background, any means, to engage in this process first from the perspective of why am I going to college? And I say this because there are a lot of 16, 17-year-olds right now who are being pulled into this college process by parents who've been itching for the last 17 years to get it started. And now the kids are saying, okay, I'm going to go to college. Why do you want to go to college? Well, isn't that what everybody does? No, not everybody does that. If I don't go to college, I'm going to be left behind. You don't know my parents. They're going to make me go to college. All kind of explanations. And what's occurred to me is that 17-year-olds, in the best sense, see college as an abstract opportunity. They don't really understand how it fits or where it fits in the rest of their lives. So as somebody who's student-centered, I try to slow the process down for families, and I mean families, mom and dad as well, at the outset, to make sure that the initial conversations aren't about the college list, but about the young person. And why do you want to go to college? What do you want to learn? How can you best learn? And the whole notion of fit that is part of the name of my company, it speaks to that reflective process. So that's what I bring to the conversation. Now, for the last, 16 years I've been away from the college, I've been able to stay engaged in other ways. You're familiar, Cyndy, with the No Name Conference, which I co-founded and continue to run. We're in our 30th year, where we bring deans of admission and secondary school and independent counselors together every year to deconstruct the last 12 months in college admission, but also to look out into the future to see what's coming. And that's been a very rewarding experience for me. But my main business is speaking. I believe that it's important to deliver messages on a one-to-many basis. Many, I think, of our audience work with families on a one-to-one basis, and I understand that. That's fine, and I'll dip my toe in that water a little bit too, but frankly, that's not what I want to do. I enjoy the opportunity to stand in front of a school audience. It's theater for me. It's performance art for me. So the programs that I do around the country and not so much around the world these days, but when I've done it, it's been a lot of fun. Families tend to leave the program saying, wow, I didn't know that. Or I'm really flattered when somebody says he's one of the truth tellers. So my objective is to equip people with better insight and information so they can make good decisions. I frankly don't care where a kid goes to college, as long as she's making a choice that makes sense for her. So that's kind of my background and what I bring to this perspective. I just enjoy looking at the whole picture and trying to understand what's going on. And heaven knows there are a lot of things happening right now that we probably want to talk about today.
Definitely. Well, I think that's very helpful to learn more about where your background, where you came from, where your passion for higher education derives, and the focus on the student. I know you have a very particular approach to matching a student to a college, and you have some particular guidance that you give college students in that regard. Can you explain a little bit more about that prospect and how you frame that for students? Because as you said, you don't care where they go. What should they be looking for?
Well, the first thing they need to do is look inward rather than outward. How often do you meet a student who, by virtue of her numbers, her credentials, her rank in class, her grade point average, her test results, she can project herself into certain applicant groups because you see the numbers work. And the student says, I know I can compete for admission there, but I don't know how to set myself apart. And my response to that student is, you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking at your resume. You're not looking here, you're looking at your resume. Right. And it's just remarkable to me. And I've done had some conversations and some webinars recently about the importance of intentionality and having a sense of purpose. And I think there's so many kids who get into this process without realizing that sense of purpose. And Cyndy, you know as well as anybody, barely half the kids who start college will ever finish.
Right.
And that to me is evidence that there's not enough or even any sense of purpose being articulated by the students who are heading off to college. So I try to get students to realize that intentionality is a big thing. Intentionality with regard to choosing colleges. Do you choose colleges because you've heard of them, you've watched their football teams, their basketball teams, your parents went there, or because you figured out that they have something that meets your needs? And you can only know that if first, you have done the reflective research to understand what it is you want to accomplish, how and why. And when you have that sense of purpose and you can point to an institution and say, I've applied to that school because now you're in the right track. How often do you have the conversation? And I've had this recently. A student says, well, I want to apply to Harvard. That's great. Why do you want to go to Harvard? It's a great school. Why do you want to go to Harvard? It's an Ivy League school. Why do you want to go to Harvard? It's ranked number 1 or 2. No, why do you want to go to Harvard? And then there's silence, because when you break it down, there really isn't any substantive explanation for why Harvard, except that it meets all the superficial criteria, rather than is becoming an effective endpoint for that student in terms of what he or she wants to learn. I was going over a student list with a young man and his mother. Mother had put the list together because she thought she understood what her son needed. and I asked him to explain what excited him about each school. And there were some Ivy League schools on the list. And he said, you know, predictably, well, it's an internationally renowned school. Everybody knows the name. And that was all he'd say. And then he got to one school that wasn't Ivy, still a very high profile school. And I said, well, what interests you about this school? I really like what they teach and how they teach. I've learned some things about the curriculum there. And I sensed a different kind of energy from him in that response. And I brought that to his attention. I said, of all the schools that you mentioned, there was only one that you got excited about. I said, that was the one that connected with what you want to do, with your sense of purpose. So when I do programs, I'm trying to get kids to think. I'm challenging them to look within. When I work with them one-on-one, I start with and I'm sure everybody does something like this, but I start with a diagnostic interview. And I want to challenge them to see themselves differently. There's a part of them in here that they underestimate greatly. And the more they can pull that out, then that intentionality is important. Now, intentionality is important for 2 reasons, not only in choosing to apply to a college, but selective institutions are very discerning among highly talented students. They can only take a handful, you know, maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 15, etc. And they can tell pretty easily when a student, a very talented student, is applying because you're a great school, or you're an Ivy League, whatever, or I want to see if I can get in.
You're in Boston,
versus you've got what I want. I've made the connection with you. I see the synergy with what can happen here. And the admission officers are looking for that sense of purpose. When they see that in an application, in an essay, in the way the student presents herself, that makes a huge difference in the process. So I try to help kids find that and bring it out of their presentations.
Well, and with this whole situation with COVID and tests being waived and all of the different upheaval, this has become even a greater concern and anxiety producing for students, for parents, and for us as counselors and advisors for students in terms of how they're going to do that and what that's going to look like. So, you know, there's just the angst of all of this is just ramped up considerably because everything's all upside down. So,
well, I'm sure you want to talk about this at different levels, but I think that the COVID-19 has short-term and long-term impacts on what we do. But short-term, kids are worried, you know, how do I present credentials when I couldn't take all the tests I needed to take or wanted to take? How am I going to present credentials when there's an asterisk by the 2nd semester of my junior year that indicates that wasn't normal? Well, in isolation, in that young person's bubble in life, she assumes that's me and it's going to hurt me, but she doesn't realize there are 2 million other students who have a similar asterisk for the same time period. Colleges are having to make some pretty serious adjustments right now. Over the last month to 6 weeks, I've interviewed 20 deans of admission from around the country simply to get a perspective from them on how their institutions initially responded to the prospects of this pandemic. And then once it hit full, you know, how the institutions and the admission offices are managing their operations to accommodate kids. And one of the questions I asked toward the end of the interview is, what would you say to a 17-year-old who's very anxious, bewildered, concerned about a process that's kind of, you know, turned on its ear right now? And to a person, they would say, breathe. Breathe. In other words, things will work themselves out, but try not to get yourself worked up into a tether right now. You want to make sure that you stay true to who you are and what you want to accomplish. I've been very impressed at how nimble higher education in general has been so far in making accommodation for kids. The number of schools that are experimenting with test optional now, the explanation being, how can we expect kids to submit tests if they haven't been able to take them? I think that's great. But I also sense there's sort of a wink and a nod there, like maybe this will be the opportunity for us to really function without tests. And if we can do it this year, maybe we won't even have to introduce them back into the mix next year. So stay tuned on that. I think that the kids are going to be writing college essays about COVID-19. And I've asked the deans of admission, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And again, to a person, they say, it really depends on the approach you take. If you take an intensely personal approach to telling your story in this time, then that's powerful. If it's, well, I wasn't able to go to school the last 6 weeks of this last spring semester because COVID-19, and I just couldn't do the things I wanted to do, and there's no real insight into the person, that's a problem. Now, I was imagining a possible essay that a lot of kids could write. And this came out of one of the meetings I had with the No Name group recently, when a guidance counselor who works with a high percentage in public high school, high percentage of first-gen kids, underserved kids. And without really bringing attention to this particular point, she said, and many of them are essential workers. And as part of the list of things that she was using to describe the kids, and it struck me. I said, whoa, you said they're essential workers. And she said, yes. Many of them are in household situations where there might be a single parent who's been laid off, and this 17-year-old has a job at Walmart or at a fast food restaurant or a grocery store, and is considered an essential worker, needing to be there to serve the rest of us at the expense of actually doing the virtual kind of learning that the rest of her classmates might be doing at home. I'm thinking, holy smokes, what kind of an essay could that be? Yeah. I'm just starting the presentation by saying, I never thought that that I would be a 17-year-old essential worker. Essential worker, yeah. And explaining what that means. So I think this situation is very difficult and very challenging and very sad for many families, and I understand that. But it does not appear that higher education is going to fold up and go away. It might look different, for a period of time. And one of the things that I'm learning from institutions is, that they're still trying to figure out what college in the fall will look like. And I think they desperately want to be open in the fall. Yeah. But they realize that they may not be able to make that call until the middle of August, literally, based on what's going on health-wise in this country. So they're developing parallel instructional tracks for virtual as well as on-site. Some schools have already announced that they're going to start early in the fall and move their calendar up maybe a week or two, eliminate a fall break, finish their on-campus work by Thanksgiving, send the students home. Maybe the traditional reading week kind of activity would be done virtually, and exams would be done virtually, and then wrap up the semester. Some schools are talking about doing 2 mini semesters within the fall and within the spring, so that instead of students taking 4 courses in the fall semester, they take 2 for 7 weeks, 2 for another 7 weeks, sort of like a block schedule that would enable the institution to manage space and resources in a more efficient manner. So I'm rambling here, and I apologize for that, but what's been interesting to me is to see how colleges and universities have been, and I want to point back to spring break of 2020 as the time when a lot of these things were hatched for the first time, because that was when the news hit that this pandemic's real and we need to do something to address the rest of this semester. So at any rate, there's likely to be college courses on this fall, likely to be some college courses offered on campuses. But I think students need to be ready to anticipate perhaps a virtual instruction environment, and they need to understand how will that work for me.
Mhm.
There's so much to think about right now.
Oh, it's just, and it always is a moving target right now because we don't know what, it's going to be in the fall. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about what's going on right now in terms of wait lists. So Colleen says she's seeing a lot of wait list movement for the class of 2020. I had a student heading Santa Clara who got off the Stanford wait list yesterday. I didn't think she had a chance of getting in. So how do you see the pandemic affecting admission for the class of 2021? How are wait lists, and that was one of my questions, how are wait lists going to be used by colleges during COVID-19?
Let's look at this more broadly within the context of enrollment management for this particular class.
Good.
Deans of admission have forever used models, predictive models, that enable them to figure out how many students to admit, and more specifically when it comes to financial aid scholarships, how to allocate money in order to get the biggest bang for their buck, if you will, financially in financial aid. So modeling behavior is 30 years old. Modeling behavior is worth zero this year because all of the assumptions behind the models of the past are gone in the pandemic. So interestingly, many of the deans that I spoke with indicated that for the most part, their credential review was done by except for some settling of the class, it was done by early March. And many of them were preparing to mail on March 13th, that infamous Friday, March 13th.
Yep.
They decided sort of last minute, because this looks like it's going to be kind of big, let's go ahead and admit more kids. So I know you asked about the wait list, but where do you get those kids? So instead of putting quite so many on the wait list, they just admitted them up front. So I think that what we're seeing now is evidence that schools admitted more students regular decision than anticipated as a hedge against what might be to come. And they didn't know what was going to come.
Right.
And I spoke with deans of admission whose letters went out, regular decision letters went out middle of March, and had already begun admitting students from the wait list in the first week of April.
Wow.
So I'm not surprised. You think Stanford admitted somebody from the wait list, you think, well, that doesn't usually happen until June or July. This is a very, very fluid situation. I have not heard yet of institutions that have hit their enrollment targets.
Wow.
And it's interesting when you hear this conversation, you have to listen carefully to what people are saying. If they're saying, we're right on our goal right now. Well, if their goal is to start in September with 500 students and they have 500 kids right now, they haven't hit their target, because typically the target is going to be an X factor beyond the goal in anticipation of summer shrink.
Right.
But there are a lot of schools that are readjusting their goals downward to accommodate the changes in response. I've been interested that the enrollment deadlines have been pushed back by some schools to May 15th to June. I talked with Jim Rollins at University of Oregon last week in one of my interviews, and he said, we decided to push it back to the end of August. He said,
oh, wow.
The reality is for a lot of, and he's just, I think, looking pretty plainly at what's bound to happen. Things are up in the air. The uncertainty for institutions is up in the air. The uncertainty for families. So if you're a mom and a dad and you're getting ready to write a big check to send your kid cross country to a pretty pricey school, and you're not sure if your kid's going to be going into a virtual environment, which means you could stay home, or is going to be, in some kind of an altered on-campus environment, you're waiting until you know. You want some certainty before you actually put your kid on the plane. And I think that there is that kind of broad-based uncertainty across the country now, institutionally, and I think as a result, families will, yes, they'll have reserved a place. They'll send the enrollment deposit in, but I wouldn't. I would not want to be an enrollment manager this year. It's very challenging. To your point, they're going to have very deep wait lists. I would not be surprised if selective institutions completely exhaust their wait lists before the start of classes in the fall. And the other interesting thing to me is colleges and universities don't know how to talk about this. And before this year, there's a lot of double talk that you can use to kind of disguise whether you're running ahead, running behind. All of the chatter that comes out in the spring about how great the year was. People are real nervous about having that kind of chatter right now. They're much more conservative in their presentations.
That I've noticed too, very definitely. So let's go back to like differentiations for students. So Latifa asks, what if one of your child's or the student's main differentiations is high test scores or a perfect test or scholarship? So that's their way of shining. So how does that affect them in terms of looking inward and becoming and finding the right colleges?
Let's make the distinction between credential,
okay,
the test score, that's what gets you in, and purpose. I think that if a young person who has great credentials should recognize that theoretically there's a lot of opportunity, more opportunity than if your credentials are modest. But still, in the competition with other students who have great credentials, how do you prove yourself? How do you give me, the admission officer, confidence that you understand what you want to do in life and how you want to do it, and that you've dug down to figure out that our school is going to meet your needs better than any other? And that's what I'm encouraging kids to do right now. And I think Latifa should do that with her kids, is get them to do some, you can do this from home, online research of the institution. And you don't want to go, a quick story if I might, you don't want to go just to the website of the college to find out if they have the major you want.
Right.
The story I would tell involves a young man I got to know a couple years ago, really, really, really smart, good numbers. The kind of smart who walks into a room and you know he's smart because he's arrogant, frankly. And he wasn't really listening to much reason. He decided that because he was really smart, that applying early decision to Swarthmore, a very highly selective school, would work for him because he had numbers for them and they would want him because he's smart. Well, he applied early decision, was denied. I think it was January 3rd or 4th of his senior year, I got a call from him. He said, I've decided to apply early decision round 2 to Middlebury. And I said, that's interesting. Why are you doing that? He said, it's the next best school on my list, which is not a good answer for Peter.
No.
So I said, let's slow down a little bit. I said, have you been up to see them yet? No. Red flag number 1. Kid's going to apply early decision, commit to a school he hasn't seen. You have 2 weeks to get up to see them. I said, do I remember correctly that you have an interest in economics? Yes. What do you know about their economics program? They have one. So he, hadn't seen the school, knows they have economics, best school on his list. He's going to apply early decision. I said, while we're on the phone, you on your computer, me on mine, let's get into the Middlebury website and see what we can learn about the economics program at Middlebury. And it didn't take long for us to learn some pretty interesting and important information. For example, faculty, college professors around the country will join departments that colonize around different sub areas of their topic. So we discovered pretty quickly that at Middlebury, the faculty are pretty fascinated with human sustainability. So I said, what do you know about human sustainability?
It's like, what is that? Right?
That's exactly what he said. What is it? What is it? I said, you not only have to get there, but you need to do some online research first and then see if you can talk to some faculty while you're there. Well, sure enough, he did go up to visit in the middle of January. He was able to garner an interview with a professor for about 2 hours, came out of the interview, and he was so jazzed about this. He gave me a call. He said, I'm so glad you had me do this. This is exactly what I want. I'm glad you had me do this. He applied early decision. They rejected him.
Oh.
Well, and he deserved that. I would argue this. Had he visited the school, had he invested in making that connection in September or October, it would have enabled him to reframe his application completely. He would have been able to demonstrate that synergy through his essays and through other types of connections in the application would have been perfect. And that's what kids can do now. They don't understand that. I mean, they're so tech savvy, but they don't understand that they can drill down into the academic programs of these schools, find out what the professors teach, find out what academic extracurricular activities there are. Lots of kids want to get into computer science. They want to be coders, programmers. They want to get into robotics. Well, a lot of schools have opportunities for students to do that. And what I want kids to do is, if that's what you want to do in college, find out what the institution has for you so that you can speak knowledgeably to that as you apply to that school. And that's what I think, talk about intentionality, big deal for me, is important here. Again, I'm probably rambling off your question.
No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. So in terms of that, so if students come back and use that purposefulness and that intentionality, and right now with COVID-19, we're still dealing with all that, everything being up and down, and the colleges don't know what's going, what their bottom line is going to be. How is that affecting merit aid and financial aid? If they're going to be pulling people off the wait list clear to, like I heard one director of admissions say she pulled students off the wait list the first week of classes, and so, but is those offers of wait list of enrollment all full pay students? What about other students? And what about, international students?
Well, oh boy, that's another tough question, because the international students have an additional concern, and that is, how can I get my visa? The embassies aren't open.
Right.
So it's interesting. Colleges that I've spoken with have spoken to the international population situations and said, these kids are enrolling. We're doing well with the enrollment, but we're still concerned that they will actually show up. And that's assuming full pay. You have money these days, your chances of admission are much, much different than they were, 6 months ago. And interestingly, from our prior relationship that I'm not a fan of the notion of we're need blind in the admission process. Well, you're not hearing that much anymore, because colleges, even those who pretended to be need blind before, realize they have to make business decisions as they look at kids. So what does that mean for the kid who needs assistance? Right now, some schools are, and for lack of other resources, using smoke and mirrors really to create more discount opportunities for kids if they can demonstrate the need. My recommendation to a family that has been hit hard by a job loss through this economy, et cetera, when you completed your tax return for 2018, you looked a lot better off than you feel right now. You need to make an appeal directly to the institution. Don't make an appeal to the FAFSA or to College Scholarship Service Profile. Those are computers that don't read, appeals.
Right.
You need to appeal to the institution, because financial aid officers are able to exercise professional judgment and can read new information, new documentation, and come to different conclusions about how you can be supported. So to a degree, families can find some solace there. But I worry about how long that's going to last, because there are a lot of families that are going to need assistance. And at the risk of kind of turning the conversation here, it's, for a lot of reasons, higher education's at a crossroads right now. And some would argue that we were at a crossroads even before the pandemic. But because of the money issues, and because institutions are not equally well endowed, they can't all answer the money questions in the same way. Because of the underlying demographic question, fewer students of college age in this country, and because the real alarm I want to sound is this. I'm worried that the advances that we've seen in the last 30 to 40 years of access for underserved populations will go away in a flash. Because right now, as colleges are piecing together their own survival for the fall and next semester, they're not looking to the kids who have nothing.
Right.
They're trying to cobble together resources from folks who can bring resources. And the kids who have nothing quite often come from schools and situations in the community where they have no advocates. They are the essential personnel. And this whole process is just going to leave them behind. And unless we are very thoughtful and systematic, as a whole industry, if you will, if we're thoughtful and systematic about how we find and support those young people, we're going to lose everything we've gained. And we haven't, by the way, talk about what we've gained, we have not gotten to the mountaintop yet, but any progress we've made is going to go away. And that's very concerning to me. And I think it's time for those of us who are involved in higher education to begin reimagining what it's going to look like. Not only what the instruction looks like, but you asked about financial aid. How do we charge? How do you charge students for virtual learning versus live in class learning?
Yep, and that's one of the questions here too. You know, people are, how are they going to, does that require less money, or, you know, we're living at home, no room and board, you know, what is that going to be?
Room and board fees that students pay, those are revenue pieces. I mean, for institutions, and now there are some actual costs associated with room and board, but reality is that institutions count on that to help fill in the cracks of the budget. So, you know, I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I think that there are some important questions that need to be raised. And I think for anybody to assume that we're going to just kind of fall back to things as usual in another 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, no, we're on the precipice of a new look in higher education, a new paradigm.
So what do you, and that was one of my questions as well, you know, looking at this, and this is a question that I think is being talked about in the circles of the higher education. We haven't heard as much in the outward circles, but what changes are being made? I've read studies that show that colleges are looking at these changes that we're making to our admission practices are not going to be temporary, that they are going to be permanent. So what kind of those, what would be some examples of some of those changes, and what would you expect to see be different in the future, in the long run, Peter?
I think that there's growing momentum for a testless environment, standardized testless environment. And I think that the fact that the College Board hasn't been able to handle the AP testing very well online this spring, the fact that the kids are now missing almost half a year at least of any kind of standardized testing, SAT or ACT, and forcing admission officers, again, to reimagine how do we, in a holistic way, evaluate candidates. I would not be at all surprised if higher education in general comes to a conclusion that we can do just as well without tests. So let's figure out how to make that happen.
Now the UC's University of California announced yesterday that they're going to be dropping it within, what, 5 years, 4 years? And they're going to try and develop their own tests. Like, if they're dropping it, then what makes them think they're going to create a better test?
Exactly. And the reality is, colleges and universities everywhere have been doing validity studies for years, looking at all the variables that predict success in the first year of college. And that's really what the SAT and the ACT are supposed to do, predict success first year of college. And the validity tests show that there is a very small increment of support coming from testing. But that given all the other factors we looked at, largely the academic record, courses, grades, et cetera, that, you know, we can make good decisions without test results. I worked in a test optional environment, and it was absolutely delightful to be able to look at young people and to look at other types of intelligence. And I'm not really well schooled on this to go into great detail, but in emotional intelligence, creative intelligences. And there's some schools doing some very innovative work right now, trying to tap into the different types of intelligence that may be manifested in different applicants, and pulling that out of the application. So I think that the door is open for new ideas right now. higher education has suffered for a long time from what a former boss of mine called the waditwa. We always did it that way. In other words, whenever there's a new suggestion that comes up and is being considered, somebody will invariably say, well, we've always done it this other way. Look, why do we need to change it? Now higher education's standing in the doorway of an opportunity to throw waditwa out and make a better approach to how this could work. I wouldn't be surprised if we see emerging from this time period, what am I saying, a combination of virtual and in-class learning that is ongoing.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. You know, flipping some schools, like we've talked about Minerva before, education, and I'm seeing a lot more discussion about the flipped classroom, where you would learn at home. And some of the large universities, like my students at UCs, for example, UC Santa Barbara, one of my students, I asked him, well, what was the largest class you had? 1,100 students. Well, how do you even fit in one room to see the professor? We don't. We stand and we watch him on a screen. Well, you can do that at home just as well as you can in a classroom sitting at the university.
Well, it's interesting. That may be an effective way to convey information, just to put it out there. It's kind of like reading a book, only you've got the professor presenting it to 1,100 students at one time. But I think there needs to be a complement to that. And I think that's what higher education is looking at, is how do we complement that one-to-many with then a smaller group orientation, where maybe there's a Q&A session with the professor or a teaching assistant, grad assistant, a mentor. There need to be labs. There need to be opportunities to see how things work. But maybe some of the general kind of throw the information out there sessions can be 1,100 to 1. I don't feel really good about that, but that's just because I'm old school and I don't like to change, but
taking instruction. I mean, I teach for UCLA, and we just had a meeting yesterday. UCLA is doing a whole group of meetings with their instructors, talking about how to flip the classroom and engage students and deliver content, but make it personal, engaging, and just think outside of the box a little bit. Well, I don't think people are going to go back. Once you start and experimenting with this, it's going to open up a whole lot of new opportunities.
Exactly. And there are going to be some faculty who are really facile with the technology and they'll grow with it. And others are sitting right now mortified because they don't know how to deal with this.
Right.
And they're similarly kids who won't know how to deal with it either. And others will just glom right onto it. I did a webinar presentation about a month and a half ago to a school. It was a student parent thing. And some of the participants forgot to put themselves on mute. And
that's always revealing, isn't it?
One couple not only forgot to put themselves on mute, but forgot to take the video off. So they weren't doing anything bad, but it was clear that they decided that mom and dad were just going to kick back on their bed and watch this webinar. And they were just having idle chat while the video was on of them. It was a little disconcerting for me as a presenter. So, I mean, I think that there's some details to work out in how these things are accomplished, but who knows?
That's true. That's true. Well, let's go to we have quite a few comments and questions. So I've got like 18 questions. There's just no way we're going to be able to get to all of them. We have 155 people already in our session today. So I'm just really glad you're all here. I'm glad to see the comments in the chat, and we teach each other. And that's really what both Peter and my role is we're facilitators, and having this great discussion, but the discussion that you have also contributes. So talking about these changes, Elizabeth's comments about some of the small liberal arts schools with modest endowments might fold as a consequence of this. I mean, I've seen predictions of 25%. Is that all a good thing, a bad thing? Should we, as counselors, should we steer students away? I've seen people who've looked at the, rating or the endowment and use that as a gauge to recommend colleges. So, what's your take on that?
I want to hark back to the last enrollment crisis. You may recall that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Western Interstate Commission in Higher Education reported that there would be a decline in the number of college-age students in this country of 25%, 25%. Before COVID.
A lot of kids.
Yeah, that's a lot. And in the Northeast where I lived and recruited, it was 35%. So when you think about losing 35% of your clientele, that's very disconcerting. And an awful lot of things happened, and I don't want to go over all of that, but there was a lot of gloom and doom about schools not surviving, costs were going up. There were a lot of, this is going to change the way we do higher education. Well, what happened out of all of that was rankings came along, kind of like throwing gas on the fire, but colleges started to market like crazy, and things that we take for granted now were born out of that era. College fairs, open house programs on college nights, student searches, things of that nature that we now see on a regular basis were born out of that area. So I guess to your question now, I don't know that I would be quite so ready to see 25% of higher education disappearing. There will be some natural attrition. There was natural attrition then, but not to the extent that folks anticipated it, because there was innovation then in higher education with regard to not only what was delivered, but more importantly, how kids were recruited into the process. The whole pricing scheme started to evolve a little bit, and higher education came out of it in a pretty healthy way, even though the pricing went through the roof. You remember the day when we were sweating out $10,000. People will never pay $10,000 for a college education. Well, guess what? So I guess I throw that out as a backdrop against this question right now. The schools that are on the edge right now are schools that historically have dealt with local populations, that have not had large reaches. Their missions have been very narrowly focused, and they're schools that, because of that, have not been able to develop large endowments. They've not had traditionally large enrollments. They've been cobbling things together with adjunct faculty and so on. So yes, there are going to be some that don't make it. And I think we're probably going to see a fair amount of mergers in the coming years. Some schools are just going to go away. They'll evaporate. Their campuses will be given over to other purposes. But some of them are being absorbed into other larger campus or larger university systems. So I think that rather than anticipating the demise of higher education right now, I would look for the evolution, the continued evolution of higher education. But there needs to be some real, I'm going to use that word again, purposeful thinking about how we as educators embrace this.
Yeah, I think, and I think that, it's going to come from the colleges, from the schools, the counselors, the parents, the students, is going to come from all those different, areas. So there's a question in here about what we mean by a flipped classroom. When I mentioned the term flipped classroom, usually what that's referring to is when, like, the instructor would provide the lectures or things like that to the students ahead of time, and then when they come to class, they're ready to discuss. They're ready to engage and talk about the material rather than delivering it all within the lecture itself. So that's usually what a flipped classroom means, is that students come, they do the learning, the access to content on their own, and then come ready to engage and discuss it. Would that jive with what your definition would be?
I think so. I don't have a studied understanding of it as you do, so that would make sense to me. Can I go back, though, to the last question about the colleges? Because I think the question was really, should I advise kids to look at schools that are teetering? And I think if you take my fairly optimistic approach that colleges will evolve rather than die, I think that we need to remember that some of those schools that are on the margin do serve a purpose for the communities in which they're located.
Right.
So
Right.
I think
Right.
that we have to look at that question contextually rather than making an overarching assessment.
Right. Don't just look at the numbers on a chart and say, no, I'm not going to recommend students come to this school.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Um, so let's see. Now, one of the participants, Nicolette, she's in my UCLA class right now. She works with a lot of students who have an EFC of 0. I did too here in Central California. And she said she's finding more students are getting higher awards from merit awards from private schools. So so if they have a 0 EFC, they're not bringing in the money. Do you see that's like, okay, they got it before, COVID-19 hit, now that may not happen again, or?
Well, two questions. One is, private colleges and universities have much more flexibility and discretion to discount. And I think we have to use that word advisedly.
Yep.
When we say student gets a scholarship, student got financial aid, student got money. No, she didn't get money. She didn't get a cent. She got forgiveness of payment. And when a college decides to forgive payment, they're saying to that student, you bring us something that is sufficient that we're willing to overlook the fact that you can't pay.
Mm-hmm.
And colleges heretofore have been, I talked about the advancements that we've made in providing access. Colleges have been trying to do more of that, and particularly private colleges. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens. The colleges that are enrolling students right now for the fall are dealing with a set budget that they already know about for next year. The students who will be affected by the scholarship strategies are the kids applying for next year, not the kids who are in the system for this year, because the colleges will make the adjustments this summer on their financial aid and scholarship budgets for the kids who are applying for next year. They're doing that this summer.
So that leads to one of the other questions and other discussions in a lot of other forums right now is, how is this going to affect the next class, our sophomore class? I mean, it affects the incoming seniors because they may not be on campus in the fall. It affects our 2021 students because they can't take the test, they can't go visit the colleges. One of our Amardeep talks about her students in India, they can't come to the campus. And well, so what about our 2022 students?
Well, I think we have to get through 2021.
Come on. Where's your crystal ball, Peter?
But think about how intense our lives have been. Even though we're grounded, we're stuck at home. The kind of news that we are bombarded with, not on a daily, but an hourly basis. This last March, I thought, felt like a 6-month month. It just seemed to go on forever. And April was only moderately shorter. So there's so much going on right now on this health crisis with the economy. Got an election coming up. So many unknowns. I would just say this first for the kids who are going to be seniors this fall. The admission process is going to be very fluid into next year and perhaps into the second year beyond. And what do I mean by that? You're going to see even the most selective schools admitting students, and this, I'm making this up. I don't know for sure what this is going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised to see schools admitting more students by a factor of maybe 10 to 15% on top of what they would normally do.
Yeah.
Just because of the uncertainty. Just because of the pricing, the cost factors. I would not be surprised to see more planned waitlist activity. Remember what we said at the very outset of the discussion, the modeling that has made it possible for colleges to move through this process with great precision is gone. Yeah. And because of that lack of precision, institutions are going to err on the side of having more rather than less. So I think that I've been getting questions otherwise from families saying, we hear that kids are deferring. Students, the seniors this year who've been admitted, are going to decide to defer because they don't want to do virtual learning. How is that going to affect selectivity next year? I'm not sure it will, because there are always students who defer for one reason or another. And the reality is that this discussion about deferral is kind of like an urban legend right now. There's more talk about it than there is reality. Admission officers are not reporting unusually large numbers of
Referral requests. Right.
Now, they'll probably come as the summer winds on. But the point is that anybody who pretends to have a crystal ball on this and can predict accurately what's going to happen is smoking something special. But I think that what kids need to do, the rising seniors, the rising juniors, they need to take care of business. They need to go about their work academically as well as they can. They need to continue to find ways to apply themselves outside of the classroom, to find that inner you, that invisible you, so that as you begin to apply to colleges, you can give them a sense of who you are, and be very sensitive to fit. Don't apply to colleges because of reputation. And that was another thing I saw recently. There are some colleges that are pitching now that rankings college rankings should be put on hold for a year or so. And I think that would be brilliant, absolutely brilliant, if the rankings were to. So, at any rate, just be ready to go with the flow.
So that's that voice of calm and sanity that we're looking for, and that's what the purpose of our Friday forums is all about, Peter. So you just hit the nail on the head, and I really agree with you. I mean, there's people sometimes, we get all wrapped up in the what ifs and how is this going to look, but we are all, almost ad nauseum, we're in this all together, and nobody has the answers. Nobody's going to be disadvantages. The colleges want to bring students to campus. What is that going to look like? How is that going to feel? We don't know yet. They don't know yet. So, but it is very interesting to think about the mechanics of it. The use of wait lists, adding in early dates. I heard a webinar this week. Well, are you going to add in early dates? Some colleges may, some college may not. Maybe they didn't have ED2 before and now they're going to offer it, or they'll bring in ED1 and EI1. So I think we're going to see a lot of that kind of changes come this next fall as well. I
was just going to add there too. I think it's really important as we advise kids to tell them to get online, to reach out to colleges, because from my conversations, I'm hearing a lot that institutions are ramping up their facility to meet kids where the kids are. Social media, online, email, and they want to have the conversation. They may not be face-to-face in person, but they can still be face-to-face on Zoom maybe. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we are like at 2 minutes. That hour just flew by, Peter, but I knew it would. So everyone, thank you for being with us today. I will go through the questions, and if there are any that so many of them are rhetorical. We really don't have answers for, but they are good thought producers. But if there's something that I feel like we need to respond to, I'll send it to you or I'll respond. Next week, I'm hoping to have the 2 college admissions professionals that I had invited previously. I'm not going to say who they are quite yet, but I hope that they'll be here, and I'll let everybody know. So watch your emails, and please share this with other people. If you find it informational and instructive, share that with other people. And Peter, tell us what your website is. How do people get a hold of you and get connected to have you do sessions or presentations and things like that?
I do programs for school groups on an invitation basis. I have to charge, but you can go to bestcollegefit.com, bestcollegefit.com, and you'll see descriptions of the programs. And if you'd like to have conversation about hosting a program for your community, just reach out to me at my email, which is peter@bestcollegefit.com, and we'll see what we can work out.
And I'll post that in the blog. I always post these. You get to be on a podcast. So I'll send it to you. So we're posting these for our video YouTube channel and on podcast. So I'll have those ready. And thank you again for your time and your sage wisdom. I always appreciate and enjoy talking to you.
It's great fun for me, and I'm glad to be able to support your work.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care. Stay safe. Stay sane. Stay calm. Bye. Bye.